Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today on an introduction to using FIDIC contract terms. Our presenter Ian Moody is here and ready to go, but I'll just talk you through a couple of things before I hand over. The slides that you see and the recording of the webinar will be available on our SlideShare page and our YouTube channel to view later, and links to this will be sent to you in our follow-up email, which asks you allow up to a week to receive this. At the end of the webinar, you'll see a survey pop up, and if you could spare a few moments of your time, please, to do this survey and give us your feedback, I would really appreciate that. As you're listening to Ian speak, you might have some questions. In fact, we've already got a question before we've even started. If you look down at the bottom right hand of your control panel, you'll see a question box, and this is where you can communicate with us. So please type your questions in there, and then Ian will allocate time at the end of the webinar to answer them. So without any further delay, I will hand you over, and thank you for your interest in Informa webinars.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're well. First of all, yes, I mean, as Sherry just said, we have a question on here, which I'll mention in just a moment. But I'm not going to read this to you. You can happily read all about me as much as you like. I just noticed it says more than 25 years experience in business, senior management positions. It's a bit more than that now, sadly. However, I'll move past that thought as my 60th birthday is approaching in 3 weeks' time. 4 weeks time. Anyway, I'll move past that idea. Anyway, let me move on. FIDIC contracts. Let me tell you one area of business I've been involved with considerably over the years is in fact contracting. My area of expertise, in fact, my last main company, which I sold in 2002, was a turnkey contract provider where we managed all areas of a contract: architectural services, design services, project management service, all the way through to contracting and ultimately facilities management outsourcing. We also had a furniture company in there as well that supplied furniture into offices and hotels and all sorts. So I have a background in this area, which is a little bit more than just an overview background. It's very specific to the area. Okay, a comment was raised a little bit earlier on and stuck on here immediately about why, if the contractor is happy with a contract that's written biased towards the owner, but they're happy to use it, why change to FIDIC? Well, the simple answer to that is, well, don't. If they're happy with it and it's working for both parties and both parties are satisfied, there is little point in moving over to FIDIC contracts. That's not what they're for. When we look at contracts in simple terms, there are two ways of designing a contract. You can design the contract yourself in-house using your own teams, your legal department, etc., and they may be based on a set of standard terms that you simply reuse and regurgitate all the time, or they may be specifically designed for a specific need. That's one way of doing it. The other way to do it is to use what's known as a model form of contract. A model form of contract is a contract designed by industry specialists that have particular knowledge of the industry. Now, there are certain types of contracts that organizations get involved in where they simply don't do it often enough, frequently enough, or have the level of in-house expertise in order to be able to do it for themselves, and that causes all sorts of problems. It puts them in a position quite frequently where they're being forced to accept the contractor's terms rather than their own terms, and there's in an imbalance. Ideally, a contract should not be favorable to one side or another. It should have a balanced level of contractual terms that work for both parties and satisfy the need of both parties. One area where this is particularly prevalent is in construction. The problem with a lot of construction work is for a lot of companies is they're not doing it frequently enough or regularly enough in order to have the level of knowledge that they need to protect themselves. Construction projects are relatively long term. They are almost always high cost. So by the nature of that, they need to have very specific terms. Now, FIDIC over the years have been developing the suite of books. So what are FIDIC? FIDIC is an organization that are industry specific to the construction industry. They design a set of terms that are acceptable generally throughout the construction industry. The beauty of it, and certainly within international terms, is most major international contractors understand FIDIC and are happy to accept them. Inevitably, there is it's not as simple as that though, because there's going to have to be a certain amount of tailoring, adjustment. You can't simply use a generic set of terms as it is, but it's a very, very good starting point. It is unlikely that any international contracting company would ever say no to FIDIC. It's industry standard, so there's the beginning. FIDIC started fundamentally with just the red book, but over the years it's got a lot further than that. They began to realize they need to do more. So now we have all these different types of book. We have the green book, the red book, yeah, etc. So let's have a little look at that for a moment. And hang on, sorry, it's not moving down. Sorry, just a minute, everybody. Where's it gone? I've lost the slide. Oh, okay, I'm so sorry. Right, thank you. Let's go through it. All right. So the first question is, what kind of project are we dealing with? Is it a straightforward, easy project? If it is, use the green book. You don't need to go any further. If the answer to that is no, then the next question comes to who is responsible for the design. If it's the owner responsible for the design, so the employer is doing the design and engineering design works, building engineering design works, etc., then you go to the red book. If it's not, then you have to make a decision. How is it going to work? As soon as you get past the idea of the employer, the contract owner doing the design work, the next discussion is what kind of contract you're going to work with. If you're going to go with lump sum style contracts, that kind of thing, it's a different conversation, because that's going to take you into turnkeys. And as soon as you start moving into turnkeys, there are lots of advantages in doing that, but it pushes the risk to the contractor rather than to the owner. As soon as you go that, then you want to go and change away. Or of course, if you don't go that method, there's other options. So we're going to run through each one of the current books in the suite and explain their uses. If I just go back for a second, because it will actually take it a little bit easier. We start here with the green book, the short form of contract. First issued in 1999. It's been around a little while now. Basically what it does is it lays down the agreement. It gives the general conditions. It has the advantage of giving the rules for adjudication, which is a major advantage that is not in most standard terms. The problem is if you don't have the rules for adjudication, what you'll end up is in litigation, and that's extremely costly should something go wrong. It's the short form of contract. It's recommended for engineering and building work of relatively small capital value. In simple terms, the guidance for that is for projects not greater than 500,000 USD. Above 500,000 USD is considered to be high value. However, it might be used if it's very simple, even if it's a higher level. So that's not, it's not someone saying, oh, 500,000, that's a rule, that's a regulation, and it doesn't work after that. It doesn't. It's a guidance number. It's very flexible as a set of terms, in that it's useful because it's got all the essential administration and commercial agreements required in it. It's simple and easy to amend by use of some supplement provisions that are provided with it. Those can be incorporated into an appendices, so they're quite easy to get and put it in together, and so you can then tailor it to your individual need. It's good for simple work. It's also good for repetitive work, so potentially for maintenance contracts, that kind of thing. Okay, but it's not good when you need highly specialist subcontractors. So it doesn't work well in that scenario. It's great when the design work is being provided by the employer. It doesn't work again when you're asking the contractor to do the design work. It's not tailored for that. The terms don't work in that area. So the responsibility for the design work, and hence therefore the responsibility for the detail of the specification, rests very firmly with the employer. Okay. It may sometimes even be used as a short design only contract. It has that advantage. It's not normal, but it's potential. The biggest area of concern, therefore, is the issues of impartiality of the designers, because it's not working like that. It's working with the employer. So that's one of the issues. The standard general terms that are included within it are particularly applicable to any form of small project. It also has a section in it that helps you with the preparation of tender and other contractual documents. So if you're going to go out to tender, which obviously you may or may not, depending on either the rules or the guidelines you're working to or your policies, but if you're going to go out for tender, it does have the guidance notes in there. And as mentioned, it's got all the basic rules for adjudication. The business of adjudication is relatively innovative. It's not been widely used in either the international market or even in the domestic market, certainly the domestic market in the UK. It's become important. I suppose one of the reasons for that came about after the Vienna Convention and the International Sales of Goods Act that came into force after the Vienna Convention. That kind of led the way to this idea that we need to build in adjudication into contracts to avoid expensive and costly litigation systems. Moving on, thanks, Trey. All right, moving on. So that basically short form of contract under 500,000 USD, but employer is responsible for the engineering, for the design work, etc. Okay, that's where it rests. Now the Red Book, that's the main one. The Red Book is the conditions of contract for construction for building and engineering works designed by the employer. It's the original one. It's far more detailed because it works with larger contracts. It can work up to any value in reality. It includes general conditions. It includes guidance for preparation. It includes forms of tender. It includes contractual agreements. And again, it does include the areas of ADR, the alternative measures of dispute. So adjudication. The Red Book lays down the general conditions of contract for construction works designed by the employer. The current Red Book is very different from the old ones. It's been seriously revised. earlier versions of the Red Book were really drafted for use on civil engineering projects. Current editions has simply removed this whole idea or concept of civil engineering from the title. Therefore, it moves this kind of move away from the idea it's just civil engineering. It's any form of construction, and that's the big difference. It works now in line with the other books in the suite. The Red Book is intended for use where the contract work is designed by the employer, as I mentioned, but it's also suitable for other forms of usage. The big area of it is about payments. It covers the payment situation. It clearly outlines that payments are determined through project measurement. Now, different ways of doing that, and the application of rate cards and prices against the bill of quantities. So, in reality, in simple terms, payment happens, there's a bill of quantities, there is then a completion level of bill of quantities against that. So it can go on percentage completion level project management accounting basis, or it can be determined by literally deliveries on site of the materials plus the percentage allocation of profit and margin and the applicable rates for all labor prices, etc. But it needs to work off the bill of quantities. There is an option in it for payment based on lump sums, but it's not really how it works. So it has a great advantage. The reason it's so good is it forces the contractor to be open, transparent about his bills, so we can see exactly where we are, and also to supply detailed rates. So it has that really big advantage. That makes it easy to judge viability of each contractor and to be able to compare them. Okay. It also covers the area of settlement of any claim. If, for example, the engineer is required to determine a claim, he is required under the FIDIC suite, under the Red Book, to agree and settle with both parties. So in reality, what happens is, if the engineer is to determine the claim, then he has to work with both the employer and the contractor to decide that both parties' requirements are met and it's not one-sided. If the contract claim cannot be determined through the engineer, in that the parties then dispute it and don't agree, then it's referred to the process of adjudication. The book clearly lays down the dispute adjudication board and how that's formatted. It's formatted simply of 3 people, but they have to be jointly appointed. They can't be appointed by either the employer or by the contractor. It's a joint decision on who sits on that board for adjudication to take place. If it doesn't work and you still can't get a decision that is accepted by both parties, it also lays down the systems of resolution by international arbitration. So it goes up the level into international arbitration, and as such will follow the basic guidelines under the Vienna Convention. It has some very general conditions in it, some very particular, very detailed conditions in it. It also has guidance about securities, parent company guarantees, advance payment bonds, retention guarantees, etc. It's all built in, and you know, we're talking about very major projects, so things like retention guarantees, they're important to be covered properly. And as I mentioned when I started to discuss it, it also covers the whole requirements and systems for tendering. So that is the Red Book. So we've got the Green Book and we've got the Red Book. We have another version of the Red Book. The other version of the Red Book is the MDB book. MDB, Multilateral Development Banks, it's part of the bidding conference required, bidding documents required for multilateral development banks. It's basically exactly the same as the standard Red Book, but it helps for particular types of requirements. So in the MD book, it looks at the FIDIC contracts with relationship to the responsibilities and duties of the borrowers and anyone others involved with project procurement. So, for example, consulting engineers, contractors, contract lawyers, etc. It's worked in line with certain key types of development bank scenarios like African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Inter-American Bank Development, Islamic Bank for Development, etc. So most of the major banked scenarios are covered. So it's useful. It has some big advantages when we're including development with banks into this. All right, so that is a very major advantage. Beyond that, it's pretty similar. If we look at it from an amendment point of view, they're mainly minor changes. However, when we look at dispute resolution, particularly in clauses 20.2, 20.8, you see the associates, there's opportunities there to make additional amendments that are particularly relevant, that are not covered by the early editions of the Red Book. So it has a series of advantages, and there's certainly ones worth looking at. All right, moving on. The Yellow Book. It's used for electrical and mechanical plant. So it's very much more specific. It lays down the conditions of a contract for construction works where the design work is carried out by the contractor. It has, as I say, it's particularly relevant to electrical and mechanical. Its focus is on the procurement of the project rather than the nature of the works that are going to be carried out. And inevitably that would be so because it's designed by the contractor. So it's more about project procurement. The Yellow Book is therefore more related to the contractual arrangements that need to be carried out with concern that the employer has handed over responsibility and authority for the design build part of it to a third party. So it's moving things away. It does, however, include areas of project administration and supervision that are carried out by an independent engineer that is independently employed by the employer. One of the problems with any form of contractor design or turnkey project is who's actually supervising that work. And certainly most of the work I carried out for more than 20 years was on a turnkey basis. And I can say for certain the most successful project is when the employer appointed a third party to supervise our work. And the beauty of the Yellow Book is it actually includes that within it. Because at some stage or another, someone has got to make the interim payments against the lump sums. So you know, typically scheduled installment based in most of these cases. There'll be a series of scheduled and installments being done, 30%, 30%, 30%, then 10% on retention, or however it's been designed. But somebody has to determine that. That cannot be determined by the contractor. Therefore, you need an independent engineer to do that, and indeed to settle on any claim between the two parties. Yeah. If there is a claim to be made between the two parties, that's the second role of the engineer. So that's what that body is there for. Needless to say, if they can't manage or settle that dispute, we're going to go into a dispute adjudication board in the same way as before. Three parties to be jointly appointed between the three individuals to be jointly appointed between the three. If that still doesn't work, then we're going to go into full resolution through the international arbitration system and beyond. General particular conditions beyond that, again, securities in there. Also things like parent company guarantees, advance payment bonds, and of course retention guarantees. As applicable, you select them. They're all pre-written. You just fill in the details that you need. Generally, the conditions are drafted in favor of the contractor by the nature of the fact that it's the contractor who's responsible for the design work. So they're going to be in favor, with the exception of the payment scheduling. The payment scheduling is not drafted in favor of the contractor. It's more drafted in favor of a bilateral agreement that works for both parties. So when you start looking at it, and if you use it as a system for electrical and mechanical, when you've appointed the contractor to carry out the works, the design works done on a turnkey base, then the reality is you need to be extremely careful when you're filling out the appendices to avoid any ambiguity under any of the conditions. However, it does have some great advantages because from an employer's benefit, from an employer's point of view, although there are some obvious risks attached, a lot of these are removed because if the employer can maintain fair and equitable control over the payment scheduling, the rest of it has to be done in line with the requirement of the contract. So there we go. Like all of the other books now, it includes the letter of tender, contract, and finally dispute adjudication methods. So the whole thing is in there. So as such, that's really good. The current Orange book. The Orange book was put out originally in '95 and laid down the conditions for design and build and turnkey projects. To some extent, it has been superseded. When it was first used, it kind of sat very neatly between the red and the yellow books, and it has its value. The point about it is that whilst it's been partially superseded, it works still very much better than the silver book, which I'll come to in a little book, or even the yellow book. And in that, it's related particularly to civil engineering and plant installation. That's where the aim lies in the Orange book. Okay. It's clear that the contractor carries all of the liability for any design work. So it gives that major benefit to the employer that there is a single point of responsibility within the book. So it's there. But you do have the disadvantage, if you use it, that you're losing a certain amount of control over the design process, because you can't impose lots of different requirements if you've actually said the total responsibility and liability the rest with the contractor. Because if you start imposing a series of design requirements or responsibilities or processes on him, then he's going to claim that you're breaching contract. Typical situation. Nothing else beyond that, I don't think, to mention. I think it's okay. Series of key club clauses you will find in the book, generally down to most general conditions clauses. There's a section in part 2 that lays down special conditions that are applicable, so they're there to follow. It breaks itself down, I suppose. I mean, rephrase that. Part 1 is the general conditions for the contract. They can be modified but not changed. Part 2 is the special conditions. I think that's the easiest way to put it. Okay, so that's that one. Moving forward, let me just take some water. I'm sorry, there's a lot of information in here. I should add at this point, actually, just while I'm doing this, everything I'm telling you, I have in note form. It is all easily available. So if you want it, it's been made available for you very simply, book by book, section by section. When I was looking at doing this, and we talked about doing it, I thought the problem is if I put together a slide pack, there's going to be 100, 200 slides in the pack. So it's probably not the best way to do it. So if you write in, there's an A4 sheet on each one of the books that explains exactly what I'm telling you. So all you got to do is write in, it will be emailed straight out to you. So please make a note of that. So anything you want to go look at, you need to look at in specific detail. There it is. The silver book, EPC, typically EPC, turnkey projects, EPCs and turnkeys. All right, contract book, general conditions are in there, guidance and preparation, the forms of tender are in there, the actual contractor agreements, and again, as per is now usual, the dispute adjudication agreement system. It's designed for use on processes, power, private infrastructure type projects. That's what it's for. The contractor obviously takes full responsibility for all the design and the project management. The risk is therefore related to time and cost and quality. In simple terms, that is all transferred to the contractor. Let's look at it in a different way. If the key project risks are time, cost, and quality, and you transfer all of the risks over to the contractor, which is excellent in many, many ways, it is therefore vitally important that you only employ experienced contractors. If you employ inexperienced contractors and use a system by which you try and get them to work EPC turnkey projects and apply the silver book to it, you're going to have enormous problems. You're going to end up very simply straight into adjudication agreements because they don't have the knowledge. you need the one thing that overrides the use of the Silver Book is that you need to have very sophisticated risk management techniques. You need them, but your contractor also needs to understand them and needs to be applying them. So if you're going to have sophisticated risk management techniques, you need to be looking potentially at what level of standards they're applying for risk management. For example, do they have ISO risk management standard, the number I can never remember. So I can't remember the number, but there is a standard for it, for example. And do they actually know how to, can they demonstrate they can manage risk? So when you think about it, if it's for process power and infrastructure, that is only part of a very much larger construction project. So the Silver Book works well when there is the best level of certainty and it's used as an adjunct to one of the other books. Because what we're trying to look for is minimizing cost risk. You will do by transferring it all over to the contractor. Yeah. So there's another thing, because it works in infrastructures. Things like the risk of ground conditions get moved over to the contractor as well. Now, ground conditions, most contractors don't want to take ground condition risk, but the reality is he's responsible for the design. Therefore, if he's responsible for the design, he should understand the ground conditions. And if he understands the ground conditions, you have made a very big, giving yourselves a really big benefit. In addition to that, he also assumes responsibility for ensuring the accuracy of the employer's requirement. And that is a really big point. That makes it different from the usual design and build contracts. In usual design and build type contracts, the contractor is not responsible for ensuring the accuracy of the employer's requirements. But in the case of using the Silver Book, which, as I said, is for processes, power and private infrastructure projects, he is responsible to ensure the accuracy of the information that's coming from the employer. So it's there. If you think about it, given the extremely high level of risk that's transferred, it is very important that the employer allows sufficient time in obtaining and considering all of the relevant information with the contractor before the signing of the contract. So basically sourcing the right contractor, ensuring the information's there with the contractor that they should have, making sure he's got all of the details that are required, because he's going to take responsibility. There are a few risks that don't get transferred. Risk of war doesn't transfer. You can't possibly make a contractor responsible for risk of war. Terrorism doesn't get transferred, obviously. So risks from terrorism don't get transferred. And usual force majeure risks, even though I would always advise everybody details the word force or the words force majeure. Force majeure means act of God, but what is included and what isn't. Look at insurance policies, it's quite amazing what they exclude from force majeure and what they don't put in there. Force majeure is excluded for floods, for example, is one I've seen many times. Sorry, excuse me, I'm just getting a message. 1 second. Oh, earthquakes, yeah. Earthquakes, yeah. Sherry's just pointed out earthquakes. She's quite right. Yeah, earthquakes can be excluded. Anyway, you're not going to be able to transfer all risks that are completely beyond the control of the contractor as considered by any reasonable person. Okay, so they don't all go over, but most of the general day-to-day risk go. Following the award of the project under the Silver Book, the contractor must be given full freedom to carry out the work in his chosen manner, provided, of course, that the end result meets the criteria specified by the employer. Consequently, therefore, the employer needs or should exercise very little control, as long as he's taken time at the outset before the contract was signed to ensure that all relevant information has been handed to the contractor. And that's very clearly stipulated. In the Silver Book, there is no need for an engineer. So there is no impartial engineer. It's not needed, because all the risks have been transferred. Okay, and in addition to that is also, gosh, I've just seen the time. Sorry, excuse me. In addition to that, it's because the whole principle of the Silver Book is that there should be very minimum influence by the employer. So you don't need an engineer. In reality, what does the engineer do? He validates the end performance. He checks at the end where it is. There's a set of issues related to things like test of completion, takeover, all that stuff is commonly in there. There's the usual guidance for the preparation of conditions, how they should be done, and of course, as per all the rest, forms of tender are also neatly included. All right, that leads me to basically the end. What does that lead us with? DOB contracts. Design, build, and operate contracts. These have been growing. There's quite a few contracts out there where employers are now appointing a contractor, not just to design and build for them, but to, sorry, excuse me just a second. We're nearly, I know, I've seen the time. Okay, so let me give you an example of a design, build and operate contract. In the UK, it was decided by the UK government that they needed to go into joint venture design, build and operate contracts for prisons. The prisons in the UK were extremely old, not fulfilling their functions anymore. They were getting a lot of riots within prisons, a lot of trouble within prisons in general terms because of the conditions. The UK government didn't have the necessary funds to replace quickly all of the prison accommodation. So the best thing they could do was go to specialist contractors to design, build, and then have an operating license to operate afterwards. So it's an extension. So design, build, and operate. So DBOs. I'm not actually aware of particular growth of design, build, and operate contracts yet regionally within the GCC. I'm sure some exist, but I don't think there's that many of them. All right, so the issue here is it's a very long-term commitment. You design and build a prison, fine. You hand over responsibility for that to the specialist. Let them go out and do it. But then you're going to give them a 20-year operating license on top of that. So you need a very different type of contract. So it follows a very similar approach to the Silver Book, except it works on the principle that it will allow this 20-year operation period within the single contract award. So they know exactly at the outset that when the contract is awarded, it's awarded with the operation requirement attached to it. Now, the strange thing about these is it's very, very rare for them to be awarded to a single entity. They're often done with joint venture scenarios, or they're done with consortium type scenarios. So they require very innovative thinking in the way they're structured. And obviously the quality and performance aspects have to be awarded at the same time as the design and build for the operation. So it's a complete mix-up. Okay. Under the design and build contract, the contractor has no responsibility, though, for the financing of the project or for its level of commercial success. His only responsibility is to design it, to build it, and operate it, but he can't be financing it. That is known as a public finance initiative operation. That's different, or private finance initiative operation. So he can't be held responsible for that. It needs to be thought of only really for long-term operations. 20 years is typical because that's how they're really designed to be used. Okay, that's what they're for. Beyond that, they're very, very similar to any other design and build. They quite clearly allow for special provisions to be included, etc., and all the clauses are there. So, FIDIC suite of contracts. Gosh, it's 5:20 gone already. A lot of information in there. As I say, I'm sorry for the limited numbers of slides, but as I say, that was mainly because I didn't quite think we could be able to produce enough slides to be able to make this of any value. We would have just been pressing buttons. Now, I'll see if there's any questions in just a moment, but the main point here for you is everything I told you has clearly been laid out and produced on separate sheets of A4 paper. If you want these details, as long as you write in, we will happily send them to you. Now, we have a lot of questions. Sorry, I've got one here that there's a problem with the sound. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I hope we managed to pick everything up. Let me see. Well, yeah, no, it's okay. I'm sorry about the sound. And as I say, anything you may have missed, Tirana, just write in and we'll send the details out. Okay, we have a question here. Does the payment terms in the Red Book cover ad hoc payment stages if the measurement during the project are difficult and time consuming? Cause yes, under the special conditions section, yes, they do. You can build that into the special conditions section, but you're going to have to be clear about how and when that might apply. But yes is the answer. How we can manage partial handover under FIDIC conditions of a contract, or how to introduce again, Saeed, that one is covered quite clearly in the special conditions, so you can add that. Yes, Saeed, I hear what you mean. So let's, what everybody, Saeed, Saeed is what he's actually saying is, from an owner's perspective, can you use FIDIC conditions to manage partial handover during the life of a contract? And the answer to that is clearly yes, you can. It's under the specific terms and clauses within the contract. Within all FIDIC contracts, it doesn't matter which one you use, there is always a section for specific clauses. FIDIC's not really, it's not the question of partial handover. That's not really the biggest problem. Yes, you can. I mean, it's as simple as that. Right, Karim, does FIDIC have rules for contracts for prefabricated products? Oh. Does FIDIC have rules for contracts of prefabricated products like medical and healthcare supplies or devices in which commercial example price discount? I'm not sure I fully understand this. And you'll get from my voice. Kareem, I think you may get from my voice, one, I don't quite understand what you're saying. But more to the point, you see, if you're talking about prefabricated products, are you talking about building pods? Maybe. That's what you might be talking about. Let's see if you've responded to me with a little bit more detail. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I can see that we are going to go down any minute now. Sorry, Kareem. I would really be appreciative if you would drop your comment on an email into the office, and I'll pick it up, because I don't really think that for what you're talking about, FIDIC contracts are appropriate. I don't think that's what you need. But if you could give a little bit more detail, because we're very quickly going to go out of time, drop an email into the office. I'll pick it up. I'll go away and think about it and come back to you. Haha. Amin, country-specific laws or international law under FIDIC? If you apply FIDIC contractual terms, you are applying a FIDIC set of general terms, which by nature, therefore, are the express terms of a contract. The implied terms of contract are therefore coming from either country-specific or international terms. The problem with international contractual terms is the international contractual terms that exist in the world today do not work for construction contracts. They only work for the supply or sale of goods. So it doesn't really help you. If you're going to say national terms for the implied set of terms, I'm hoping you understand the distinction between the two, then my comment is this. I would normally set the implied terms under the law that is prevalent in the contractor's country rather than the employer's country. The reason for that is because it's enforceable. If you set the law, I mean, say for example, you're using contractor out of the UK, and you set the law under UAE law for the implied terms. You've got the express terms of contracts are cleared through FIDIC. That's where they've come from. That's fine. The implied terms of contract you set under UK and UAE law. If you now set them under UAE law and there is a breach, how are you going to impose judicial process from the UAE against the UK company if that UK company are not interested in playing with you? Now, based on the fact that under the express terms, you may well have made partial payment, you may, for some reason, find it in a default situation where there's contractual breach and you want to try and get some of that money back. And whilst you may get favourable judgment in the UAE court, the UAE court cannot impose that in the UK. So it'd be better to do it under their law. I don't think international law really helps here. The comment is also made about tendering by Amin. Oh, this will have to be the last one, I'm sorry. The comment is also made about tendering. Does FIDIC give a guide on open tendering and closed tendering? No, it gives a guide on tendering procedures. I can't really go into the subject of open and closed tenders. To be honest with you, regionally here, people use the terminology open tender, but they don't actually do open tendering. They do a system of closed in that it is partially selected. It requires selection process. What FIDIC is recommending anyway is that you should fully appraise all contractors in detail before you go into the tendering process, and therefore you should only ask relevant contractors that have the skill and ability to bid. The ones that don't shouldn't be included. So I suppose you could term in that as they are saying it should be a closed tender. But then beyond that, as I say, regionally here, people don't do open tender. Open means exactly what it says. It means open to anybody, anywhere, whoever they are, to bid. So you don't do that anyway. I think I've just got time for one more before we get shut out. If I can find an easy one. Yeah, I'm sorry. Kareem, I've got yours again. I need to pick that up later. I really need to pick that up. Kareem, you've added a comment about FIDIC guidelines only level to the electrical and related contracts. Yes, you're right for what you're talking about, but they're not. They're much more than that. Kareem, can I honestly please email, send in? We'll send you the guideline, yeah, and beyond that, we will add in. Sorry. We'll add in the rest, okay? If it doesn't answer your question, we'll see if we can give you more afterwards, all right? But we'll send you the guidelines. I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, to everybody, we're about to get cut offline. So please, can we print this off? No. All right, if we can't, but listen, ladies, gentlemen, whoever we are on here now, please send in your questions. They'll get emailed across to me and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. In the interim, whilst you are waiting, Sherry or somebody will be sending you, once you email in, the guides that I've been explaining. It may answer, it may not, okay? And then I will get back to you. I'm having a break at the end of the year, as you can imagine, so I shall be no doubt getting bored in a month's time, and at that point I'll sit down and go through any outstanding detail. I'm sorry to have to say good afternoon. I do want to thank you all for everything, and thank you very much for coming online. I hope that you found it interesting. Please have a look at what we're sending to you. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you.